Welcome back to the show. We're talking about how powerful rich Americans are in the United States and their influence on American society. Let's get back to the discussion. Charles, technology notwithstanding, this is an issue that is resonating in the election campaign that we are seeing right now. People are talking about it. There is a feeling, if we listen to what some people are asking of their candidates, that the system is rigged against those Americans who are not rich and rigged for those Americans who are very rich. Do you recognize that as well?
Oh, I think I'm sitting here in New Hampshire, which is the first in the nation primary in the U.S. And interestingly, you see it on both sides. I mean, if you start listening to the people who support Donald Trump and the folks who support Bernie Sanders, on both sides of those tales, you're hearing an extreme frustration that everyday working people are left behind. And they may have different proposed solutions and so on. But at bottom, I think both of those political phenomena reflect everything you've been talking about, which is this growing gap and also this belief that Washington and the political system no longer works for the benefit of the average American.
Julianne, you talked earlier on about the tax system in the United States, and we have looked at how the rich have been very successful at generating wealth, making it grow. Talk to us about how tax laws suit them more than it suits the ordinary person. I remember during the last presidential election, which was, well, when Barack Obama came to power, at least his second term against Mitt Romney pays 14% tax. This is a guy who earns $250 million a year.
Whereas someone who earns, let's say, $200,000 a year is going to pay about 30% tax. And someone going down the ladder is going to pay about that. So what you need to understand is that those folks in Congress are supporting their donors. And I think that my colleagues have talked a little bit about those who are contributing to political campaigns. And this nonsense is crazy. When people like the Koch brothers say they're going to put in $500 million into campaigns, whereas Bernie Sanders has raised his money with people who can give less than $2,700. There is no way, whether you go door to door or anything else, that $500 million is going to match the money you get for people from less than $2,700. So members of Congress have decided that they're siding with the wealthy. Who paid them? Let's just say that. Who paid them? If I can just for a second think about the whole credit industry. Now with credit cards, you have to prioritize your credit card bills over your child support. So someone who is in debt for credit cards will have to pay that before they pay their child support. Why? Because legislators are for sale. Because people came in and passed legislation that put them on sale. These folks are on sale, and so this whole conversation we're having about the wealthy is not only about the fact that there's a wealth gap, but the wealth gap turns into a power gap.
Right, David, that raises the question. The people on Capitol Hill, perhaps in the White House, perhaps in state assemblies around the country, whom do they represent?
They represent those who pay them, as we just heard. And one of the ways that corruption happens frequently now is that they get out of office, out of Congress or the White House, and they're rewarded with huge speaking fees and lucrative jobs and so forth. But now there's become this revolving door. So you look at, for example, Bill and Hillary Clinton, who over their political careers have taken in $3 billion with a B in what once upon a time would have been called bribery, and who together just in 2014 and the early part of 2015 took in over $25 million in speaking fees from huge corporate interests with a great deal of interest in what the U.S. government does and absolutely no interest in hearing those two speak. You know, we can't sit through hours of hearing them speak. Why can anybody else? It's bribery. In plain English, it's bribery. And this is someone, Hillary Clinton, who as Secretary of State had her personal foundation taking millions and tens of millions from foreign countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar and several others, and then baselessly waiving standard restrictions on selling those countries U.S. weapons. So being bought by foreign countries.
colleague, I want to say to you, with all due respect, while I'm not,
Please.
I don't have Hillary's back, but what I want to say is that we need to follow the money. It's not just about Hillary Rodham Clinton. It's about all the folks who have jumped in the fray and who have these super PACs and other things. Let's talk about that crazy man, Donald Trump. Let's talk about the Rubio Cruz super PACs. The only person, in my opinion, who walks into this with integrity is Bernie Sanders. Really?
I agree with you.
Right.
I did not mean to give any impression I didn't. Of those 158 people who paid half the money into elections, 138 of them are funding Republicans.
Okay, let me get.
So let's just connect the dots. That's all I'm asking you to do is connect the dots, please.
Yeah,
right,
so actually, if you connect the dots, there is no intellectually honest defense of the whole campaign finance system. And it's not just rich people, it's other organized interests. It's public sector unions, it's corn growers, it's plaintiffs' attorneys. We've created a system where it's fabulously expensive to get elected. The politicians, as you've heard, and I agree, go where the money is. And where the money is, there's always a quid pro quo. So in some ways, we've started out with the rich, and we've gone to the tax code, which is broken. But it has led us to, I think, the right place for an intervention, which is just a completely broken electoral system.
So what do we do with the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court has allowed the super PACs to do this under First Amendment grounds, which is nonsense. And so how do we begin to get this court or get our legislators to do something different? And they're not gonna, because they all essentially benefit from this super PAC outside the beltway, outside the ordinary raise money nonsense.
Okay, we have the Supreme Court, which, as you say, allows these super PACs to collect all this money. Charles, where does one start to fix this?
Well, I agree with Julianne. We've kind of painted ourselves into a corner on this, we being the Americans, in that once the Supreme Court decides that, per the First Amendment, money is speech, then unless you can overturn that decision, it's very hard, if not impossible, to do anything legislatively. We can't shorten campaigns because that would truncate free speech. It's very hard, if not impossible, to put limits on contributions. So sadly, I think a lot of what we're talking about follows from that Supreme Court decision, and the Supreme Court, by design, is very difficult. It's very difficult to reach in and change those decisions.
But Charles, it is possible because if indeed, I'm sorry, if indeed legislators passed a law, the Supreme Court could not overturn the law. But part of the problem is that the Supreme Court belongs to somebody.
Yeah, but David, let me ask you this. Julianne speaks about the legislators passing a law. Legislators are put into power by people. Isn't it up to the people to throw them out?
You know, Sarbanes of Maryland's idea and legislation that would give small amounts of money to everybody, enough to over-purchase the multi-billionaires' money in the elections, is a brilliant idea under that bizarre interpretation by the Supreme Court. The Congress also has the power, fundamentally, to take areas of legislation away from the Supreme Court, and the states have the power to amend the Constitution without Congress. California just gave voters the right to vote on asking Congress to please reform itself. With 10 more words, they could have had the state of California commit to overriding Congress if it doesn't act. And that's where we're going to have to go, ultimately, is to local and state power and overriding the corruption in Washington, because it's not going to fix itself.
Julianne, we are hearing about this issue during this current election cycle. Is anything going to change after the election?
I don't think so. I think that these folks are stuck on stupid, quite frankly. They're not going to change anything because they enjoy the status quo. I, of course, am a rabid Democrat, but I don't think that Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Martin O'Malley are going to do anything, and I don't think the Republicans are. I think what we have is the kind of gridlock that, if we look back historically, would require, and I hope my colleagues agree with me, the development of a third party or a party that supersedes the current party. People are angry. There was an NBC poll that just came out. People are angry. White women more than anyone else, but people are angry, and they're angry because they don't think that anybody cares. And I think our political parties have abdicated the notion that they're going to make change and that they care.
Charles, very quickly, do we need a broad wholesale change in the political system, a third party, before we can see any...
We do. I think we need, it doesn't have to be a party, but we need a movement, hopefully from the center, because that's the only way in the current climate you're going to get stuff done. 42% of Americans now say they're independents. Membership in the two parties is plunging. We've got a Senate of 100 people. If you do the math, there should be 42 independent senators. At present, there are 2. So I believe wholeheartedly that we need some kind of political realignment.